being a different girl in the kingdom was a lot like wearing a beautiful dress backward. Everyone noticed. No one had the decency to say it kindly, and in the end, the shame was still yours.
Look at her standing.
Helena had already learned how to carry the weight of stares, whispers, and cruel comparisons. The moment she entered any room, she could feel the air change, as if her very presence required an apology. Plus size, taller than the standard the village loved to dress up with fake smiles, she carried her own body the way someone carries a sentence. And still, she did not bow her head. Never did. Maybe that was why her father hated her so efficiently. Ravok was not just a bitter man. He was the kind of man who confused authority with brutality and alcohol with courage. When he was sober, he humiliated. When he was drunk, he destroyed. And to make things worse, there was Thalia. The younger sister was everything Helena was not in her father's eyes: delicate, beautiful, admired, and courted. So Ravok looked at his eldest daughter as if she had been placed there by mistake. And that was how the expulsion came. "You shame me.
Shame me.
You were born wrong,"
You
he
were
said,
born wrong.
with no room to defend herself, no love, no mercy. Only shame, a breadbasket in her hands, and the cold order to leave home. With a knot in her throat, Helena walked away without looking back. But Helena was not entirely alone. The animals always spoke to her, and that morning even a red-haired cat seemed to follow her as if to say, "You're still standing." And then the castle called to her. Inside it, a solitary king would look at her like no one ever had. And, without understanding why, he would decide to choose her as his wife. If you love intense wolf stories with destiny and twists, go ahead and subscribe to the channel right now. So subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any chapters. And how about we get to know each other better? I'm Maggie Reed, the author of these stories, and you? Drop a comment below with your name and what city you're watching from. The winter had hardened everything that morning. The wind sliced through the narrow streets like a blade of ice, and even the smell of fresh bread drifting from the family bakery seemed to struggle against the cold. Inside the house, though, the cold ran deeper than the weather. Helena pressed the cloth-wrapped bundle to her chest and tried to ignore the way her worn coat strained across her fuller figure. She was a plus-size woman, broad-shouldered, soft-curved, impossible to overlook even when she wanted nothing more than to disappear. But what made her impossible to ignore in that house was not just her body. It was the way she held her gaze steady, the way she spoke without bowing her head, the way she refused to shrink, even under the weight of constant rejection. "Are you just going to stand there all day?" her father Ravok snarled without fully looking up from the counter. His voice was rough, slurred with cheap liquor and old bitterness. Helena did not answer right away. She had learned early that in this house, silence often hurt less than speaking. Near the oven, her mother, Petra, cast her daughter a quick, pained glance. There was love there, yes, deep love, desperate love. But there was also submission, the tired kind that belonged to someone who had tried to protect a child too many times and lost too many times to keep trying. "The bread is ready, sweetheart," Petra said softly, as if gentleness alone might change the air in the room. "Take the best loaves to the castle. The king is expecting the delivery earlier today." Helena nodded and reached for the basket. It was always the same: work, duty, endurance. She helped keep the bakery alive with her own hands, and still she was treated like a burden. Then her younger sister Thalia stepped into the room, adjusting her shawl with elegant care. She was beautiful in the effortless way that made people lower their voices when they looked at her. Ravok's expression shifted the moment he saw her, hard lines softening into a kind of pride Helena had never once been given. "You should learn from your sister," he muttered, tipping his chin toward Thalia as if the comparison were obvious. "At least she knows how to carry herself. At least she doesn't embarrass her family." Helena felt the words strike deep, but she did not lower her gaze. She never did when he spoke to her like that. I'm just taking the bread, she said, steady enough to irritate him, controlled enough not to make the morning worse. Ravok let out a short, humorless laugh. And you say that like it's some great achievement. You eat like you've never seen food before? You walk around like a clumsy fool, and you honestly think any man would want a woman like you? The room seemed to tighten around her. Petra closed her eyes for a second, as if the sentence had wounded her too. Thalia looked away, uncomfortable, but not brave enough to challenge him. Helena only tightened her fingers around the basket cloth. This was not new. What hurt was the cruelty of hearing, out loud, the thing he wanted her to believe. That her body was wrong, that her existence was too much, that being plus size was reason enough to deserve contempt. But Helena lifted her chin. Then it's a good thing I don't need your approval to work, she said. The silence that followed was thick. Ravok's face flushed with anger. He was drunk enough now to stop caring who heard him, and the resentment he had carried toward her always seemed ready to spill into something uglier. You don't answer me in my house, he snapped. You know what you do here? You embarrass me. That's all. You walk around this bakery with that smug little attitude, with your whole body taking up space like you own it, talking as if you have value. No decent man is ever going to look at you twice. Helena's heart kicked hard in her chest, but she remained standing. Then he pointed toward the door. That's enough. If you think you're so independent, then go. Go work somewhere else. Go live off that sharp tongue and that body you seem so attached to. You're useless here except for reminding me what I never wanted for this family. Petra made a small sound of horror. Ravok, please. Be quiet, he barked at her, turning with brutal impatience. Then he looked back at Helena. You shame me. Get out. Now. For a moment, the world went still. Helena looked at her mother. She saw the pain in Petra's face, saw how badly she wanted to defend her daughter and could not. She saw Thalia frozen in place, torn between guilt and relief. Then she looked back at Ravok, who was staring at her as if she were something to be thrown away. Helena drew in one slow breath. She would not beg. She would not cry. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. The moment the door closed, she pressed her palm to her mouth and let one silent tear escape. Then she forced herself to breathe and kept walking. She picked up her coat, adjusted the shawl over her shoulders, and said only, I don't need to stay where I'm treated like a disgrace. Then she walked out before her voice could shake. The winter air hit her like punishment. Cold bit at her cheeks, and the basket of bread suddenly felt heavier now that her chest was empty. Still, she straightened her shoulders and kept walking. If Ravok wanted to throw her out, she would not give him the pleasure of watching her collapse. Finally, said a thin, offended voice at her feet. Helena looked down and found the family's red cat trotting beside her with grave dignity. About time someone in that house showed some backbone, the cat said. That man has been underestimating you for years. Despite the ache in her chest, Helena let out a small laugh. You talk like I'm not being thrown out of my own life. The cat flicked its tail. You were thrown out by a man too small to understand your worth. That was her secret, and her curse. Animals spoke to her. They always had, as naturally as breathing. Birds, horses, dogs, cats. Every creature seemed to know she could hear them. The problem was that among humans, it made her seem stranger, more broken, more wrong. The road to the castle stretched white beneath the frost. Helena walked with determined steps, carrying the still warm loaves that had to be delivered anyway, because life did not stop just because her father had decided she no longer belonged under his roof. The fields were silent, the sky low and gray, and the bakery cart creaked softly over the frozen ground. He's still furious, commented the horse harnessed to the cart. I'm humiliated, not deaf, Helena muttered. Both can be true, the horse replied. But you're still walking. That, at least, was true. By the time the castle came into view, rising through the mist like something carved out of stone and shadow, Helena had steadied her breathing. The portcullis stood open. Servants moved briskly through the outer corridors. The whole place smelled of wood smoke, warm bread, and polished stone. Helena was led through the kitchen entrance, where the warmth wrapped around her in a way that almost felt kind. The head cook took the basket with a nod, but her eyes lingered on Helena's face. "You look pale, dear," the woman said. "My father decided I was no longer useful in his house," Helena answered, too calmly for the words she was saying. The cook's expression softened, but before she could respond, an unusual hush swept through the castle. Not the silence of work, a deeper one, a waiting silence. The animals sensed it too. Outside, the birds went quiet. A hound in the corridor lifted its head. Helena felt the change in the air before she understood it. She turned slowly, her pulse shifting for reasons she could not name. And then she saw him, the king. He was walking toward her with two men behind him, but it was impossible to look at anyone else. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark tunic that made his hair and eyes seem even more striking, he carried himself with the heavy calm of a man who had lived too long with grief. He was not a smiling man, not an easy man, and yet there was something about him that pulled attention like flame in winter darkness. Helena stopped. So did he. At first it was only a passing glance. Then he slowed. His eyes moved over her face, her simple clothes, her fuller body, the breadbasket in her hands. And instead of disdain, there was curiosity. Quiet. Unexpected. Deep. "Wow," whispered the cat from a bench nearby, sounding deeply satisfied. "He's looking at you like he just found treasure buried in plain sight." Helena nearly forgot to breathe. "Be quiet," she mouthed without moving her lips. The king stepped closer, his voice low and rough when he finally spoke. "You're the baker's daughter?" Helena nodded. "Yes, Your Majesty." He looked at her for a heartbeat longer than etiquette required, as if trying to see something beyond what the eye could catch. "What is your name?" "Helena." The name seemed to stay between them, suspended in the cold air. "Helena," he repeated slowly. Then his gaze sharpened with something almost like recognition. "You speak to animals as though you know them." Helena's stomach dropped and lifted all at once. No one ever asked her that. No one, except the creatures themselves, had ever noticed. She raised her eyes and found his fixed on hers, attentive in a way that was far too intense to be casual. "They speak to me," she said before she could stop herself. A brief silence followed. The men beside the king exchanged a look, clearly unsure what to make of her answer. But the king did not laugh. He did not step back. He only watched her with an expression that seemed to mix surprise and recognition, as though something old had just stirred awake. The cat's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Ah," it said. "Now I see." Helena's skin prickled. "See what?" she asked, barely able to speak. But the cat only blinked, and the king kept looking at her as though he had just found something he had never meant to search for, yet somehow had always belonged to him. And in that moment, Helena realized the entire castle seemed to be holding its breath, as if something had begun. 3 days had passed since Ravok threw her out. Helena did not trust the way the king looked at her, not because he was cruel. That would have been easier. Cruelty was familiar. It belonged to men like her father. This was different. The king looked at her as if she mattered, and Helena did not know what to do with that. She stood in the castle corridor with the breadbasket still in her hands, aware of the cold stone beneath her boots and the quiet, steady weight of his gaze. Basil the cat jumped down beside her foot and flicked his tail. "Your Majesty," he said with complete seriousness, "you are making her nervous." Helena almost choked. The king's mouth twitched. "You speak to cats," he said. "Only the rude ones," Helena muttered. Basil lifted his chin. I'm not rude. I'm honest. That earned a short laugh from the king, low and surprised, and Helena looked at him again. He was not smiling much, but when he did, something in his face changed. It made him look less like a ruler and more like a man who had forgotten how to be happy. The thought unsettled her. You were sent here to deliver bread, he said. Yes, Your Majesty. And you did. Helena nodded. The king's eyes sharpened. Even after your father threw you out. Her breath caught. How do you know that? He was shouting at the door when your cart left. Helena said nothing. There was nothing to say. The humiliation was still fresh, still burning under her skin. Basil snorted. Humans gossip like crows. The king glanced down at the cat, then back at Helena. What is his name? Basil. The cat puffed up. Finally. That made Helena smile, just a little. The king noticed. Come with me, he said. Helena blinked. What? My staff will want to thank you properly, and I want to hear more about these animals who speak to you. That sounds suspicious, Basil said. It is not suspicious, the king replied. Exactly what a suspicious thing would say, Basil shot back. Helena bit back a laugh, but the king saw it anyway. Good, he said quietly. They crossed into the warmer part of the castle, where the smell of broth, rosemary, and fresh bread wrapped around Helena in a way that made her shoulders loosen. She was painfully aware of the servants watching her walk beside the king, a plain baker's daughter, a plus-size woman in a worn coat. Standing next to a man everyone treated like he belonged to another world. The kitchen was busy and warm. A stout cook in a flour-dusted apron looked up and blinked at the sight of them. This was Marta. She brought the bread, the king said. Marta's face softened at once. Then she's my favorite person in the castle. Basil gave a solemn nod. Correct. Helena laughed under her breath. Marta set a bowl of broth in front of her and frowned. You're cold. I'm fine, Helena began. You're not, Marta said, already turning away. Drink. Helena obeyed. The broth was hot and rich, and the kindness of it nearly undid her. It was such a small thing, but after everything that morning, it felt enormous. The king stood nearby, watching her with that same quiet attention. My father is not a kind man, Helena said at last, staring into the bowl. That much is obvious, the king said. Helena looked up. He did not sound angry at her. He sounded angry for her. That was worse, because it made her want to trust him. Basil curled on a stool. He has the face of a sad wolf. I'm right here, the king said. Then stop being so obviously sad. Marta made a small sound that might have been a laugh. Helena tried not to smile, but failed. The king looked at her as if that smile mattered more than it should have. Then the kitchen door opened hard. A servant stood there, pale and breathless. My king, your father is outside. He demands to speak with his daughter. Helena went still. Basil's fur puffed up. Ah, the villain arrives. The king's expression turned cold in an instant. When he looked back at Helena, his voice was calm. Do you want me to send him away? No one had ever asked her that before. Helena set the bowl down slowly. Outside, her father was waiting. And for the first time in her life, the choice was not his to make. Helena set the bowl down slowly. Outside, her father was waiting. For one suspended second, no one in the kitchen moved. Marta had stopped stirring the pot. Basil had stopped grooming his paw. Even the servants nearby seemed to feel the air tighten, as if the castle itself had noticed the shift. The king's expression turned cold, but his voice stayed steady. Do you want me to send him away? No one had ever asked Helena that before. Not her father. Not her mother. Not the world. She lifted her chin. No. Basil's ears perked up. That was a dangerous answer. I respect it. Helena ignored him, though her mouth twitched. The king watched her for a beat longer, then nodded once. Then let's see what he wants. He led her toward the front corridor, and Helena's pulse began to beat hard under her skin. The castle felt different now. Not welcoming, exactly, but alert. As if the walls themselves were bracing for trouble. At the front chamber, her father stood rigidly near the door, coat half open, face flushed from cold and drink and rage. Ravok looked out of place in the castle's polished stone and warm light, like mud tracked across clean floorboards. His eyes found Helena at once, then narrowed when he saw the king beside her. There was no shame in him, only irritation. "Well," Ravok said, dragging the word out. "There she is." Helena did not answer. He looked her up and down with open disgust, taking in her body, her coat, the flour still dusting one sleeve. "I expected you to come back on your own," he said. "I didn't think you'd run to the castle like some abandoned stray." Basil, perched near Helena's shoulder on a nearby bench, let out an offended hiss. "Stray? He's calling her a stray? That's rich coming from a man who looks like a wet coat rack." Helena almost smiled, but her father was still speaking. "You've embarrassed this family enough," Ravok snapped. "You come home now or you can stop pretending you have a place there." The words were intended to cut. Helena knew that. He said them the way a man slams a door, hoping the noise will do the work of authority. But this time, she was not alone. The king stepped forward half a pace. Not threatening, just enough. "She is not your property," he said. Ravok stiffened. "She is my daughter. And she is a woman standing in my castle," the king replied, "which means you will speak to her with respect." For the first time, Helena saw uncertainty flicker across her father's face. It vanished almost instantly, replaced by anger, but it had been there. Tiny. Real. He recovered by sneering. "Respect?" he said. "This one has always been a disappointment. Too loud, too soft in all the wrong places. Too big for her own good, if you ask me. She was never suited for anything better than bread and dust." The room went silent. Helena did not flinch. She had been called worse. But the king's jaw tightened. Basil's tail whipped once. That man is one insult away from being pecked by birds. As if summoned by the remark, a raven outside the nearest window gave a sharp caw. Helena heard it, but her eyes stayed on her father. "You threw me out," she said, quiet but firm. "You don't get to act shocked that I left." Ravok laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I threw you out because you were shaming me. Your sister knows how to behave. Your mother knows how to keep a house peaceful. You—" He pointed at Helena as though she were evidence in a trial. "You just keep taking up space and expecting people to tolerate it." Helena's stomach tightened, but her voice stayed level. "My space is not your shame." That made him falter. It was only a second, but the king saw it too. Aurelian's gaze shifted to Helena, and something in it deepened. Pride, maybe. Or admiration. Or something more dangerous than either. "You hear that?" Basil whispered. "He's falling." "Basil," Helena murmured without looking away. "What? I'm supporting the romance." Marta, who had followed them quietly, folded her arms. "For once, the cat is right." Helena shot her a startled glance, and Marta gave her the smallest, fiercest nod. Ravok noticed none of that. He was too busy trying to regain control. "You will come home," he said to Helena, voice low and hard. "You owe this family obedience." Helena stared at him for one long beat. Then she said, "No." The word landed like a bell. Ravok's face darkened. The king stepped closer to Helena, not touching her, not yet, but near enough that she felt the warmth of him at her side. It was a small thing. It should not have mattered so much. But it did. Aurelian spoke calmly. "You will not force her. I am her father, "And I am the king," Aurelian said. The answer was simple, final. Ravok looked between them, realizing too late that the balance had shifted. Helena saw it then. The old certainty in her father's eyes had cracked. Not because he had suddenly become kind, not because he had learned regret, but because for the first time, someone stronger than him had refused to let him keep speaking to her that way. It was almost enough to make the hurt in her chest ease. Almost. Ravok reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "Fine. If you're so determined to disgrace yourself, then read this." He thrust it toward her. Helena did not take it. The king did. Aurelian unfolded the page and read it once. His expression sharpened. "What is this?" Helena asked. Ravok smiled thinly. "A notice of debt. The bakery is late on its payments. If you don't come back, the house goes under. Your mother knows it. Your sister knows it. You walking out makes it worse." Helena's heart lurched. For the first time, she saw something like panic in the corners of Ravok's mouth. Not fear for her, never that, but fear of losing leverage. Marta made a small sound of disgust. Basil flattened his ears. "He brought paperwork to a family fight. How deeply boring." Helena's hands clenched. Her mother had known. Thalia had known. They had hidden it from her. Not because they wanted to trap her, because they were trying to protect her. The hurt that had begun in the kitchen now changed shape. It became something sharper, more complicated. Aurelian looked at Helena. "You didn't know." She shook her head once. The king folded the paper with slow precision. "Then this is no longer simply your father demanding obedience." Ravok's eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means," Aurelian said, voice cold now, "that you brought a business problem into my castle and tried to disguise it as a family matter." Helena turned toward him, startled. His gaze met hers. "It also means," he added more quietly, "that I will handle it." Something inside Helena went very still. Not because she suddenly felt rescued, because no one had ever said those words to her before and meant them. Ravok looked furious now, but he was losing ground too quickly to hide it. "You don't know what she is," he snapped. "She's stubborn, difficult, impossible." "She is brave," Aurelian said. The words cut through the chamber. Helena felt them before she understood them. Brave. No one had ever called her that in a way that sounded true. Aurelian's eyes stayed on her face, his voice lower now. "She was thrown out in the snow and still carried your bread. She stood here and did not beg. She speaks to creatures most people ignore. She walked into my castle wounded and refused to bow her head." His jaw tightened. "She is not impossible, Ravok. She is exhausted from being made to feel small." The room went silent again. Even Ravok had no answer for that, at least not one he could say without revealing too much of himself. From somewhere behind Helena, a soft voice spoke. "She always was the strongest one," Petra said. Helena turned. Her mother stood near the doorway, pale and trembling, Thalia half hidden behind her shoulder. They had come in quietly, unnoticed until now. Petra's hands were clasped so tightly they were white at the knuckles. Thalia looked nervous, but her eyes were clear, resolute. Ravok stared at them in disbelief. "What are you doing here?" Petra inhaled shakily. "Something I should have done years ago." Thalia stepped forward, voice trembling but steady enough to matter. "She was never a disgrace. You just hated that she couldn't be controlled." Helena felt the air leave her lungs. Her father's face darkened. But before he could speak, Petra lifted her chin and said, "And for the record, the bread debt is not Helena's shame. It's yours." Basil let out an audible gasp. "Oh, this is delicious." Marta made a sound that might have been a laugh, though she tried to hide it. Ravok looked as if the floor had shifted under him. He had expected silence, submission, fear. Instead, he had been met with 3 women standing together. Helena's chest tightened so suddenly she had to look away. Aurelian noticed. He lowered his voice. "Helena." She looked at him. His expression had changed again. The king was still composed, still dangerous in that quiet way. But there was something warm beneath it now, something undeniable. "Stay," he said, "for tonight." It should have been a simple word. It was not. Helena stood between the man who had expelled her and the man who had asked her to remain, between the life that had made her feel too much and the one that suddenly seemed to see her clearly. When the door closed, Helena pressed her fingers to her eyes until the sting of tears faded. She would not cry over a man's kindness. Her mother was watching her with hope, Thalia with fear and pride, Basil with open delight, Marta with fierce encouragement, and the king, still beside her, looked as though he had already decided the answer mattered more than the question. Helena drew in a breath. Then she nodded. And in the silence that followed, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Her life had already begun to change. A week had passed since she first arrived at the castle. Helena stayed. That single choice changed the shape of the night. The castle did not suddenly become home, and she did not suddenly become brave enough to stop feeling every stare. But something had shifted, and she felt it in the air as she followed Marta through a quieter corridor toward a guest chamber that smelled faintly of cedar, lavender, and old stone. "This room was prepared for visitors," Marta said, pushing the door open with her hip. "Try not to judge the decor." The king had the interior staff replace the original curtains last year, and apparently velvet was too emotionally aggressive. Helena blinked. "That sounds like a very specific complaint." Marta snorted. "He said it with a straight face, too. Men with grief get dramatic about fabric." Basil hopped onto the bed and inspected the pillows like a critic. "This one smells expensive and slightly suspicious." Helena let out a breath that was almost a laugh. The room was warm. The bed was soft. And yet she still felt as though she were standing on the edge of something enormous. She set her hands on the edge of the blanket and tried not to think too hard about the fact that she had been invited to stay by a king who looked at her like she was a question he wanted very badly to answer. A soft knock came at the door. Marta opened it before Helena could speak. Aurelian stood in the doorway, his dark coat dusted faintly with snow, his expression calm but his eyes fixed on Helena. He looked tired in the quiet way people looked when they had been carrying too much for too long. Basil immediately sat up. "The sad wolf returns." Aurelian glanced at the cat. "You're impossible." "I'm accurate." Helena folded her hands together to keep them from fidgeting. "Is something wrong?" "No," he said. Then, after a small pause, "Not exactly." Marta looked between them with the expression of a woman who knew exactly what was happening and intended to enjoy it. "I'll be outside," she said brightly, "in case either of you starts being insufferably noble." She left before Helena could respond. The door closed. Silence settled over the room. Aurelian looked at Helena for a long moment before speaking. "Your father has left the castle." Helena held very still. "He's gone?" "For tonight." That answer was careful, and she noticed it. He was not promising peace. He was only giving her truth. "He was furious," Helena said. "Yes." She looked down at her hands. "He'll be worse when he gets home." Aurelian's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed even. "He should never have spoken to you that way." The words landed harder than she expected. Helena gave a small, dry laugh. "That's the nicest thing anyone has said to me all day." Basil made an offended sound. "Rude to the broth. Rude to the king. Rude to the cat. This family has no manners." Aurelian's mouth twitched. "I am beginning to understand why you tolerate him." "Basil?" Helena said. "I tolerate no one," Basil replied. "I merely observe with great wisdom." That made her smile again, and this time Aurelian saw it clearly. Something in his face eased, just enough to make Helena's chest tighten for reasons she did not want to name. He stepped further into the room, slower than before, as if giving her space to object. She did not. "I wanted to speak with you," he said. "About my father?" "About you." The answer caught her off guard. Helena tilted her head slightly. "That sounds dangerous." "It probably is." Basil flopped onto the bed with theatrical interest. "Oh, this is promising." Aurelian ignored him. "For years," he said, "I have sat in this castle and done what was expected of me. I have listened to counsels, signed orders, endured endless polished conversations with people who only smiled when they wanted something." Helena stayed quiet. His voice lowered. "I lost my queen 3 years ago. Since then, the castle has felt empty. I didn't think I'd feel anything again. But these past weeks, with you here..." Helena felt something in her chest shift. She had guessed grief in him. Hearing it named made him seem even more human. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He looked at her then, and there was something raw in that look. "You do not say that like someone trying to be polite." "I'm not." Basil lifted his head. "She's terrible at polite grief. It's one of her better qualities." Helena shot the cat a warning glance. Aurelian surprised her by actually smiling, faint and brief, but real. "No," he said. "It is." The room went still again, but this time the silence did not feel cold. Helena cleared her throat. "Your people seem to think I'm here for some grand purpose." "They do," he said. "So do I." Her pulse skipped once. "That sounds worse when you say it like that." "It is not meant to sound like a sentence." She looked at him, and he looked back, and the air between them seemed to thicken with something that had no business being this intense already. Helena swallowed. "Then what is it supposed to mean?" Aurelian took one step closer. "I think you came here by accident," he said, "the way wild things sometimes do. And I think the moment you walked into my kitchen with bread in your hands and your chin lifted like you refused to be crushed, my wolf recognized something I had not allowed myself to want." Helena forgot to breathe. Basil made a low whistle. "Well, that's direct," Helena managed. "Your wolf is apparently very dramatic." "He is," Aurelian said. His gaze never left hers, and very certain. Heat rose in Helena's face, but it was not embarrassment exactly. It was the strange, overwhelming sensation of being seen too clearly and still not turned away from. "That's an inconvenient talent," she whispered. "For you or me?" "For both of us." This time his smile lasted longer. It changed him in a way she could feel from across the room. Before she could think better of it, Helena asked, "Do you always talk like this?" "Only when I'm nervous." That made her laugh, an honest laugh that surprised her into silence. The king looked at her like the sound had struck something deep inside him. Basil sighed loudly. "There it is. The room is soft now. I may perish from sentiment." "Poor Basil," Helena said. "Not poor. Deeply appreciated." A knock sounded from the doorway before either of them could answer. Marta peeked in. "I hate to interrupt whatever this is, but your father has sent a message." Aurelian's expression cooled at once. "What kind of message?" Marta handed him a folded note. The kind written by a coward with money problems and a dramatic sense of self-importance. Helena went cold. Aurelian unfolded the paper and read it silently. His mouth flattened. "What is it?" Helena asked. He looked up. "Your father is threatening to take the debt to the Trade Council unless you return home and resume your duties as a daughter." Helena felt anger flare so fast it almost stole her breath. "Duties?" she repeated. "He threw me out." Basil's tail lashed. Men like that always confuse cruelty with structure. Marta muttered. "Truer words." Aurelian handed Helena the note. The handwriting was slanted and ugly, all pressure and arrogance. The message was simple enough. Come back, or he would ruin the bakery standing in the village. Helena stared at the page. He knew exactly where to hit. Not her body, not her pride, her mother, her sister, the bakery, the work, the fragile little life they still had left. Aurelian watched her face change. He is trying to corner you. Yes, she said, voice tight. That's what he does. A beat passed, then another, and when Helena looked up, she saw that his expression had changed too. The king was no longer merely concerned. He was angry now, but controlled, like a storm held behind glass. Did your mother know about this? He asked. Helena hesitated. Maybe, probably. And your sister? Helena looked down. She would have known if my mother did. Basil's ears perked. Ah, the women are conspiring. Helena almost smiled despite herself. Quietly. Marta folded her arms. As they should. The king's eyes moved back to Helena. Then perhaps you are not the only one in that house who wants something different. The words hit harder than they should have. Helena thought of Petra's trembling hands, Thalia's careful eyes, the way neither of them had defended Ravok when they stood in that castle chamber. The way they had looked at her like they had been waiting years for someone else to be brave first. And suddenly, the hurt shifted. It did not disappear, but it changed shape. She was not alone in the wreckage. She looked at the king. If I stay here, he'll call it defiance. Let him. And if he hurts them because of me? Aurelian's answer came immediately. Then he will answer to me. The certainty in his voice was dangerous in the best possible way. Helena stared at him, and for one strange moment, the room felt too small for the force of what was happening inside it. Then Basil yawned theatrically and rolled onto his side. I believe I am witnessing the beginning of a very expensive romance. Helena barked a laugh before she could stop herself. Aurelian looked startled, then amused. Expensive? Velvet curtains, kingly brooding, emotional bread deliveries, Basil said. This is clearly not a budget courtship. Marta turned away so the king would not see her grin. Helena shook her head, still smiling, but the tension had not left her body. It lived in the space between her and Aurelian now, bright and dangerous and impossible to ignore. He stepped closer, just enough that she could smell the cold on his coat and the faint, clean scent of cedar underneath it. When I looked at you today, he said quietly, I remembered something I had forgotten. Helena's breath caught. What? That joy is not gone forever, he said. Sometimes it just arrives wearing flour and scowling at the world. Helena stared at him. It was such a ridiculous sentence that for one stunned second she could only look at him. Then she laughed, real and startled and warm, and to her own shock she saw something in his expression break open at the sound. Not pain, relief. As if she had placed light back into a room he had lived too long in the dark of. Basil sat up, suddenly solemn. Well, that's embarrassing. She fixed him. Marta crossed herself in mock reverence. Miracle in the castle. Helena looked at Aurelian, still smiling, and something inside her trembled with the force of it. He had not just noticed her. He had been waiting for her in a way she did not fully understand yet. And perhaps, in some impossible way, she had been waiting too. At the door, Marta cleared her throat. I should warn you, she said. Your father is not finished. If he's clever, he'll try again tomorrow. Helena's smile faded. Aurelian's hand flexed once at his side, restrained but ready. Then tomorrow he learns he has made an enemy of the wrong man. Helena looked at him sharply. He turned to her then, and the heat in his gaze was unmistakable. Stay tonight, he said again, more softly this time. Not because you need rescuing. Because I want you here. The words settled between them like a vow neither of them had planned. Helena's heart was beating too fast now, too hard, and she hated how much she wanted to believe him. But she did. Outside the window, snow moved in a pale blur against the dark. Inside, the king stood waiting. And Helena, who had been told all her life that she was too much, too soft, too big, too wrong, realized that this was the first night anyone had ever looked at her, like she was exactly what he had been missing. 2 weeks into her stay, Helena had stopped expecting the castle to feel like a dream. It still did. But now it felt like a dream with fingerprints on it, something touched and altered by real life, by a king who had looked at her like she belonged in his world more than she had ever belonged in her own. She woke to a soft knock and found Marta at the door with a tray of food and the expression of a woman who enjoyed knowing everything before anyone else did. "Breakfast," Marta said. "Also, your father has already been described by 3 servants as an emotional rash in a coat." Helena blinked, then laughed despite herself. Basil, curled on the foot of the bed, lifted his head. "That is insulting to rashes." Marta set the tray down. "Your cat is my favorite." "He knows," Basil said. Helena sat up, wrapped in the strange warmth of borrowed blankets and the more dangerous warmth of memory. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Aurelian's face when he told her to stay. Heard the quiet certainty in his voice. Felt the strange, steady pull of him, as if her life had tilted 1 degree closer to something she had never dared to want. The knock came again, sharper this time. This time it was not Marta. A servant entered with a folded message, bowed, and left without a word. Helena took the paper. Her father's handwriting slanted across the page like a threat dressed as etiquette. "Come home before you shame yourself further." Her jaw tightened. Basil leaned over. "That man writes like a soggy boot." Marta skimmed the message over Helena's shoulder and made a face. "He really thinks this is a command?" "It is to him," Helena said. But the more she stared at the note, the less fear she felt, and the more anger rose in its place. He had thrown her out. He had humiliated her. And now, because he could not control her, he wanted to drag her back by guilt. "No." She folded the paper slowly. "I'm not going back today," she said. Marta nodded once, approving. "Good." Basil stretched. "Excellent. I was getting attached to the bed, and I hate leaving on a weak emotional note." A little later, Helena found herself in the castle garden with a basket of herbs Marta had insisted she carry, for the illusion of usefulness. The air was cold but clear, the winter sun weakly silver across the paths. Aurelian was already there when she arrived, standing near a stone arch with his hands clasped behind his back. He turned when he heard her steps, and Helena, annoyingly, felt it in her chest immediately. He had that effect on her now. One look, and she forgot how to be casual. "You came," he said. "I was told there would be herbs." His mouth twitched. "A lie, then." "Possibly." That earned her the faintest smile. Basil appeared from somewhere near a hedge, tail high. "I should warn you both that this garden has poor gossip control." Aurelian glanced down. "You followed us." "I supervise." Helena shook her head, but she was smiling too. The king's gaze settled on her with infuriating steadiness. "Did you read the message?" She lifted the folded note. "Yes." "And?" "And your interior staff are right. My father does write like a damp shoe." That startled a real laugh out of him, low and warm. Helena froze for half a second, just watching it happen. It was absurd how much that sound did to her. Not because he was handsome, though he was. Not because he was king, though he was that too. It was because his laughter sounded rare, earned. Like light breaking through a room that had been closed for too long. Aurelian noticed her staring. What? He asked. Nothing, she said too quickly. Helena. The way he said her name made the air feel different. She looked down at the herbs to hide the reaction on her face. I just don't think people laugh at you enough. His expression changed, subtle and unreadable. That is likely true. Basil snorted. Tragic. He has been robbed of joy by poor company and bad wallpaper. Aurelian looked toward the cat. You have opinions about the wallpaper? It offends me, Basil said. Marta would have loved this conversation, Helena thought. Her mother would have smiled behind her hands. Thalia would have repeated every line later with perfect timing. It was strange how quickly the thought of them had become part of her days here. As if summoned by memory, Helena's pocket brushed against her hip, and she remembered the small folded cloth Marta had tucked into her sleeve that morning. She stepped aside, unfolding it discreetly. Inside was a tiny note from her mother. Your sister and I are trying to help. Do not go home if you can avoid it. He is worse when he feels he is losing. Helena stared at the note until the words blurred. He doesn't know? Aurelian asked quietly. Helena shook her head. They're helping me in secret. Basil went very still, then slowly said, Ah, the quiet rebellion arc. Excellent taste. Helena folded the note again, emotion tightening in her throat. My mother is scared. My sister acts brave only when she thinks no one is watching. But they're trying. Aurelian's gaze softened in a way that made her stomach do something traitorous. They love you, he said. It wasn't a question. Helena looked up at him, and for a moment there was no teasing, no cat commentary, no winter garden. Just the two of them and the strange, steady space between words that mattered too much. Yes, she said. And then, because she could not stop herself, she added, It's inconveniently moving. That broke his composure just enough to make him smile again. You're quite dangerous when you're amused, he said. I've been told worse. I doubt that. Basil planted himself on the stone path and looked up at both of them. This is all very tender, but I must point out that the king has not yet apologized for being broody for 3 years. Aurelian folded his arms. I was grieving. Exactly, Basil said. Rudely. Helena laughed before she could help it, and Aurelian's gaze stayed on her as if he had been waiting for that sound all morning. Then, as if the moment had a magnetic pull, he stepped closer, not enough to touch. Enough that Helena felt the warmth of him. I meant what I said last night, he told her. About you bringing light here. The words landed softly, but they changed everything. Helena's throat tightened. You barely know me. I know enough. That's not the same. No, he said. It is better. She looked away first because if she didn't, she might have done something ridiculous like lean into him. Her voice came out thinner than she wanted. Don't say things like that. I'll start to believe them. Her pulse had been unreliable around him since the moment she met him, and now it was becoming completely disrespectful. A sudden rustle came from the hedge. A robin burst out, wings scattering snow from the leaves, and landed on a low branch nearby. Helena turned instinctively. Basil, she said, your cousin is here. The cat bristled. That is not my cousin. That is a Loudfeather. The robin tilted its head. Someone's cranky. Aurelian's brows lifted. It speaks to you too? Only her, Basil said, which makes all of you very jealous. The robin fluttered its wings and cocked its head toward the castle. There's a man at the outer gate. Helena went still. Aurelian noticed immediately. What kind of man? Your man, the robin said, which made Helena almost choke. Noisy, angry, smells like old ale and fresh bad decisions. Helena's stomach dropped. Her father. Aurelian's face cooled instantly, all warmth sharpening into command. How long? Just arrived, the bird said. Before Helena could move, the first bell from the gate rang through the castle. Basil flattened his ears. Wonderful! The villain has returned for an encore. Helena stared toward the sound, her whole body tightening. He had come. Again. And this time, she knew he had not come only for her. He had come because he thought he could still force his way back into her life. Aurelian looked at her once, reading the fear she tried to hide. Then he held out his hand. "Come with me," he said. Helena looked at his hand, then at his face. And for the first time in her life, when danger came calling wearing her father's voice, she did not feel alone. She placed her hand in his, and the king led her toward the gate. Nearly 3 weeks had passed since the confrontation in the courtyard. The gate had not yet opened, but Helena already felt her father's presence like a bruise under the skin. She stood beside Aurelian in the main corridor leading toward the outer courtyard, her hand still warm from where his had held hers. That warmth should have faded by now. Instead, it seemed to follow her, steady and maddeningly reassuring. Basil marched ahead of them with the grim determination of a tiny court official. "If he says anything insulting," the cat announced, "I will be unbearable." Marta, who had insisted on coming along, adjusted her apron and muttered, "So no change then." Helena almost smiled, but her stomach was too tight for it. Aurelian glanced down at her once. "You do not have to speak if you do not want to." "I know. You can let me handle him." Helena looked up at that. There was no arrogance in his voice, no possessiveness, just a quiet certainty that he would stand between her and whatever came next. That, more than anything, made her heart ache. The outer doors opened. Cold air rushed in first, then Ravok. He strode into the courtyard with the swagger of a man who had mistaken volume for power. His coat was damp at the hem, his cheeks flushed from the cold and from whatever indignation had carried him here. He took one look at Helena, and his mouth twisted. "There you are," he said, as if she had wandered off and not been cast out. Helena held her ground. Ravok's eyes flicked to Aurelian, and a muscle jumped in his jaw. He bowed too late and too shallow to matter. "My king." Aurelian did not return the bow. "You were told not to return." Ravok laughed once, thin and ugly. "I was told many things. Men in castles love to give instructions when they think they're above consequence." Basil climbed onto a low stone wall and stared at him. "He talks like a coupon with debts." Marta snorted. Helena did not, though the sound inside her chest loosened a fraction. Ravok ignored the cat, which only made Basil more offended. "I came for my daughter," he said, "and for what you owe my family." Aurelian's expression cooled. "You mean your debt?" "I mean the bakery," Ravok snapped. "Without my daughter there, the business suffers. The village talks. The lender grows impatient. If she insists on making a spectacle of herself here, then the king can pay for the inconvenience." Helena felt anger flash hot enough to sting. "She is not an inconvenience," Aurelian said. Ravok gave a sharp laugh. "You've known her less than a week. Enough." The word landed hard. Helena looked at Aurelian then, really looked, and saw the absolute stillness in him. Not the stillness of indecision, the stillness of a man who had already chosen a side. Her father noticed too, though he tried not to show it. "She is difficult," Ravok said, shifting tactics. "Stubborn, emotional, too much. You cannot possibly want to tie yourself to a woman like that." The insult was meant for Helena, but it struck the courtyard like a thrown stone. Before she could answer, Thalia's voice came softly from the side door. "She is not too much." Everyone turned. Helena's younger sister stepped out into the daylight with her chin lifted, though her hands were trembling around a folded cloth. Behind her, hidden half in the doorway, stood Petra. Helena froze. "Thalia," Ravok said sharply, "get back inside." No, Thalia said, and the single syllable sounded like it had cost her years. You've said enough. Petra's face was pale, but her eyes were steady in a way Helena had never seen in the house. She looked at her husband with the exhausted sorrow of a woman who had finally reached the end of fear. She helped keep the bakery alive, Petra said quietly. She carried more than her share, you know that. Ravok stared at them, as if the world had taken a wrong turn. You're both delusional. No, Petra said. We're done lying for you. Basil's ears perked. Oh, this is good, Marta whispered. Very good. Helena could hardly breathe. Her mother and sister had stepped forward, not in rage, but in truth. It was more powerful than rage, more dangerous too. Ravok's eyes narrowed. You two should remember your place. Thalia gave a small, humorless laugh. You used to say that like it mattered. Aurelian said nothing. He simply let the silence widen, gave the women space to speak, and Helena felt something in her chest shift again. He was not taking over. He was not rescuing them from themselves. He was letting them stand. That mattered. Petra looked at Helena then, and her voice softened. You were never the shame in this family, she said. You were the one who kept it from falling apart. Helena's throat tightened so suddenly it hurt. Ravok's face darkened with rage that had nowhere to land. You've all gone mad. Maybe, Basil said, but at least they're interesting. The cat had the satisfaction of someone who knew he had won no matter what happened next. Ravok stepped forward, lowering his voice like a threat. If she stays here, the bakery goes under. The lenders will take everything. And when that happens, don't think this castle will fix it. Helena looked at him and saw the old tactic clearly now. Fear, guilt, pressure. The same cage, only dressed differently. But this time it did not work, because Aurelian moved one step forward, and the air changed with him. Then the bakery will not go under, he said. Ravok blinked. What? I will cover the debt, Aurelian said. Not as a favor to you, as an investment in a business that has clearly been sustaining itself despite your incompetence. Basil gave a sharp little gasp. Oh, that was elegant. Marta hid a grin behind her hand. Ravok looked genuinely stunned now, which was somehow more satisfying than anger. You can't just, I can, Aurelian said, and his voice remained calm enough to be dangerous. And I have. Silence fell across the courtyard. Helena felt the king's hand brush lightly against her lower back, not pushing, only steadying. It was such a small gesture that it nearly undid her. Her breathing caught. Ravok noticed. Of course he did. His mouth twisted with something ugly and bitter. You think she's worth this, he said to Aurelian. The king's answer came without hesitation. Yes. One word. That was all it took. Helena looked up at him, and the force of his certainty made her feel dizzy. He did not say it as a man showing off. He said it as a fact, as if the truth had already been decided, and the world would simply have to adjust. Ravok's eyes darted between them, then toward Petra and Thalia. He could feel the room slipping from his control, and that seemed to frighten him more than anything. Thalia lifted the folded cloth in her hands and finally unfolded it. Inside was a small pouch of coins. Helena stared. Petra's eyes flashed with shame and determination. We have been saving, she said, a little at a time, for months. Ravok went rigid. You stole from me. Thalia's mouth tightened. We took from what we earned. Basil practically vibrated with delight. This is exquisite. I should have brought popcorn. Helena's eyes burned suddenly. She had not known. She had not known that her mother and sister had been quietly building a way out from under Ravok's shadow. It was a tiny thing, only a pouch of coins, but it was also proof. Proof that they had not accepted his version of reality. Proof that they had been fighting in the only way they could. Her father looked around as if expecting someone to defend him. No one did. Not Petra, not Thalia, not Marta, not Aurelian, not even Helena. And then she understood with painful clarity that he had never really been powerful at all, only louder than the people he had trained to stay small. Helena stepped forward. Her father looked at her, ready to dismiss, to sneer, to wound, but she did not let him. "I'm not going back," she said. The words did not shake. Ravok's face hardened. "You think this changes anything?" "Yes," Helena said. "It changes me." The courtyard went still. Aurelian turned to her then, and the look on his face was so open, so intent, that it made her chest feel too full. For one brief moment, she saw exactly what he had been trying not to say. He had lost his joy before she arrived, and somehow, impossibly, she had begun to return it. Basil blinked up at them. "Well, that was disgustingly romantic," Marta muttered. "Finally." Ravok gave one last furious glance at the king, then at the women who had dared to stand together against him. His mouth opened as if to say something cruel, but nothing came out that could matter anymore. He was no longer the loudest voice in Helena's life. He turned sharply and left the courtyard in silence. No dramatic exit, no victory speech, just defeat, worn thin and plain. Petra exhaled like someone who had been holding her breath for years. Thalia stepped closer to Helena, her eyes wet but bright. "You looked good doing that," she whispered. Helena laughed shakily through the ache in her throat. "I felt terrifying." "You were," Thalia said, very seriously. "To him, which is lovely." Marta nodded. "Excellent work all around?" Aurelian stood beside Helena, close enough that she could feel his presence like heat. When he looked at her, there was no triumph in it, only respect, and something more intimate than that, something almost tender enough to hurt. "You did that yourself," he said quietly. Helena shook her head once. "Not alone." His gaze flicked to Petra and Thalia, then back to her. "No," he agreed. "Not alone." And that, somehow, was the most important part. Helena stood in the winter light, with her mother and sister near, the king at her side, and the first real shape of her life finally breaking open in front of her. For the first time, it did not feel like she was being saved. It felt like she was being chosen. Weeks had passed, and the castle had gone quiet in the strange way it did before something important. Helena noticed it the moment she woke. Not a hush, exactly. More like the air itself was waiting. Basil was already awake, sitting on the window ledge and glaring at the gray morning sky. "If the sky starts being dramatic," he said, "I'm leaving." Helena sat up slowly, still half wrapped in the warmth of the blanket, and rubbed sleep from her eyes. The room smelled faintly of cedar, soap, and the last traces of the herbal tea Marta had brought the night before. Somewhere in the corridor, footsteps passed and stopped again. Another day in the castle. Another day in which she was no longer invisible. That thought still startled her. A knock sounded at the door. Marta came in carrying a tray and an expression sharp enough to cut bread. "Good," she said. "You're awake. Your father has been seen in the village asking questions like a man who thinks intimidation is a hobby." Helena frowned. "About me? About you, the bakery, the debt, and apparently the moral failing of plus-size women everywhere," Marta said dryly. "He is exhausting." Basil gave a slow blink. "I would like to formally support any plan that keeps him away from this castle." Helena accepted the tray but barely touched it. Her appetite had been replaced by a knot of nerves ever since the courtyard the day before. Ravok had left defeated, yes, but not broken. Men like him rarely stayed down for long. They simply found a new angle, and that fear sat under everything else. Aurelian found her later in the library. She had gone there to help arrange a stack of account books. At least that was the excuse she gave herself. But really, she had wanted a quiet place to breathe. The library was lined floor to ceiling with dark shelves and smelled of paper, wood, and snow carried in on boots. A raven perched above the mantel, watching her with the unnerving intelligence of a judge. "Don't stare at me like that," Helena told it. The raven clicked its beak. "I'm not staring. I'm assessing." "Of course you are," Basil said from the floor, where he had stretched himself over an open ledger like a tiny tyrant. "You birds always act like you're running a census." The raven ruffled its feathers. "I have been insulted by worse cats." "Then you've been around unsophisticated company," Basil replied. Helena laughed under her breath just as Aurelian entered. He paused in the doorway, looking at her as if the sound alone had steadied him. That look did something dangerous to her. It always did. "Are they always like this?" he asked. "Yes," Helena said. "It's a public service." Basil lifted his head. "We improve morale." Aurelian's mouth curved slightly, then he crossed the room and held out a folded note. Helena took it. "What is it?" "From your mother." Her fingers tightened immediately. Petra had never sent her notes before, not directly. Not unless something was too important to say in front of Ravok. Helena opened the paper with care. "Meet us after dusk near the old herb shed. Thalia has something to tell you." Helena looked up. What does that mean? Aurelian's expression changed, not alarmed exactly, but alert. "It means your family is moving in ways your father doesn't know about." Basil sat up. "Excellent. Secret women meetings. This is where all the fun begins." Helena folded the note again, a strange ache gathering in her chest. "He'll notice if I disappear." "Let him notice," Aurelian said. The words should have sounded simple. They did not. They sounded like permission. And Helena was discovering that permission, from this man, felt more intimate than affection from anyone else she had ever known. That evening, she slipped out with Basil trotting beside her and found the old herb shed at the far edge of the garden, half hidden behind winter vines and a crooked fence. Petra was already there, wrapped in a dark cloak, and Thalia stood beside her with a lantern in one hand and a determined look on her face that Helena had never seen at home. "You came," Petra whispered, relief breaking through her caution. Helena stepped closer. "Of course I did." Thalia huffed a short laugh. "We weren't sure if the castle would keep you too busy being chosen by an infuriatingly attractive king." Helena nearly stumbled. Basil immediately perked up. Finally, someone in this family says the important part out loud. Helena turned, horrified. "Basil!" "What?" the cat said. "It's true." Even Petra's mouth twitched then, and the sight of it loosened something painful in Helena's chest. Thalia's face sobered. She held up the lantern a little higher. "I found something in Father's desk," she said. Helena went still. Thalia reached into her cloak and pulled out a thin bundle of papers, tied with string. "He's been keeping records. Not just debt records." Petra's voice was low. "He's been listing what the bakery owes, yes, but also what he claims each of us costs him." Helena stared. Thalia's eyes flashed. "Us, like we're damage." Helena took the papers with numb fingers and unfolded the first page. The lines were crude and ugly, expenses, losses, costs. Then her name. Then her mother's. Then Thalia's. And beside each, amounts written in a hand she knew too well, as though affection itself had been reduced to arithmetic and found insufficient. Helena's stomach turned. She had to look away for a moment, blinking rapidly until her vision cleared. "He does this every month," Petra said quietly. "I only found out because he forgot the book open one night. I've been copying pages when I can." Basil made a noise of outrage. "That is vile." Thalia looked furious now, not crying, not soft. Furious in the clean, steady way of someone who had finally stopped apologizing for being hurt. He thinks because he pays for flour and wood, he owns us. Helena felt the papers tremble in her hands. And then, from somewhere inside her, anger began to sharpen into something colder. Petra reached for her fingers. You do not have to go back to that house unless you want to. Helena looked at her mother. Really looked. For years, Petra had been small in the ways fear makes women small. But here, in the lantern light, she looked different, stronger. Not because the fear was gone, because it had finally been outlived. Thalia crossed her arms. We can leave him exposed, not loudly, not with a scene, but enough. Basil's tail flicked once. Ah, yes, quiet revenge, my favorite genre. Helena felt a laugh rise, stunned and disbelieving. It almost turned into tears, but she swallowed it down. Before she could answer, a sudden voice cut through the garden. What exactly are you doing? All four of them froze. Ravok stood at the far end of the path, coat open, face hard with suspicion and drink. He had come quietly, too quietly. Helena could smell the wine from where she stood. The papers in her hands suddenly felt hot. Petra inhaled sharply. Thalia went pale. Basil lowered himself into a defensive crouch. Oh, splendid. The emotional mildew has arrived. Ravok's eyes locked on the bundle of papers. What is that? No one answered. His gaze moved from Helena to Petra to Thalia, and something dark and ugly flickered across his face. You've been sneaking around, he said. All of you. Thalia lifted her chin. We've been surviving. His mouth twisted. You'll survive better when you remember who feeds you. Aurelian's voice came from behind them before Helena had even heard his footsteps. No, he said. Ravok turned. The king stepped into the lantern light, calm and dangerous, with the kind of stillness that made every inch of the garden feel smaller. Helena felt his presence like a line drawn in stone. You do not get to speak to them that way, Aurelian said. Ravok's face darkened. This is family business. It stopped being that when you reduced your wife and daughters to bookkeeping. Silence snapped tight between them. Helena looked at Aurelian, then at her mother, then at Thalia, and felt something in her finally settle into place. Not fear, clarity. Ravok took one step forward. You're all going to regret this. No, Thalia said, and her voice did not shake. You are. Helena's breath caught, because there it was. Not a scream, not a threat, a promise. Petra straightened beside her daughters, and for one impossible second Helena saw exactly what they had become together. Not victims, not shadows, not women waiting to be rescued. Women building a future in secret, page by page, choice by choice. Ravok looked from one to the other and realized it too. Aurelian did not move. He only watched Helena, as if waiting to see what she would do with the truth now in her hands. Helena lifted her chin. I'm not afraid of you anymore, she said. The words did not come out loud. They came out steady. Ravok stared at her as if she had struck him. Basil whispered, Oh, that one landed. Helena folded the papers slowly and tucked them into her cloak. One by one, her mother and sister stepped closer until the three of them stood shoulder to shoulder in the lantern light. Ravok saw it. His face changed. For the first time, he was not the center of their world. He was outside it, and the look in his eyes said he knew. Aurelian stepped to Helena's side, not in front of her, beside her. That mattered too. You're done, the king said to Ravok. Ravok's lips curled. With what? With controlling them. The garden went silent except for the faint rattle of winter branches. Helena felt the king's hand brush her sleeve, a question, not a demand. She looked at him, then at her mother and sister, and something warm and fierce rose in her chest. She did not know yet what revenge would look like, but she knew it would not be loud. It would be together. And for the first time in her life, Helena could already feel the shape of it. Nearly a month had passed since the garden confrontation. The castle felt different, not calmer, sharpened. Helena noticed it in the way servants moved faster, in the way whispers stopped the moment she entered a hallway, in the way Aurelian's guards stood straighter than usual near the doors. Something had shifted, and the whole place seemed to know it. Basil padded beside her toward the king's private study, tail high. "If this is another dramatic conversation," he muttered, "I'm demanding a wage." Helena glanced down at him. "You don't get paid now?" "I am paid in outrage and access." That almost made her smile. She was still smiling when she entered the study and found Aurelian already there, standing by the window with a sealed letter in his hand. He looked up the moment she came in, and the expression on his face made her chest tighten. Not fear, concern. "Your father sent another message," he said. Helena stopped cold. "What now?" Aurelian held up the letter. "He is requesting a public meeting. He claims there is a misunderstanding about the bakery debt and your association with the castle." Basil let out a dramatic groan. Association. That is the word of a coward trying to sound legal. Helena walked closer, slowly. "He wants to make this public?" "Yes." Her stomach turned. "He's trying to corner me in front of everyone." Her hand trembled slightly as she tucked the papers into her cloak. She pressed it flat against her thigh until it stilled. Aurelian's jaw tightened. "He is trying to force your hand." Helena looked at the letter, then back at him. "And will you let him?" Aurelian's eyes held hers. "No." That single word settled something in her. Before she could answer, a soft knock sounded at the door. Marta entered with a tray and a face that suggested she had already decided to hate Ravok for the rest of her life. "You two look too serious," she said. "I brought tea. Serious people need tea or they become unbearable." "Too late," Basil muttered. Marta ignored him. "Also, your sister is here." Helena blinked. "Thalia?" "She says it's important." A minute later, Thalia slipped into the study with a scarf wrapped tight around her hair and a bundled cloth under her arm. She looked nervous, but determined in that way Helena was beginning to recognize. The way Petra looked when she was ready to say something she had spent years swallowing. Thalia held out the cloth. Helena opened it and found a small stack of folded receipts, a ledger copy, and a key. "What is this?" she asked. Thalia's mouth tightened. "The bakery storage cabinet. Father keeps the actual payment records there." Basil blinked. "Oh, this is getting delicious." Thalia ignored him and stepped closer. "I copied everything I could before he noticed. The debt is real, but he has been exaggerating it for months, charging interest that was never agreed to. Taking flour on paper that never left the shop." Helena stared. Aurelian took the papers carefully and scanned them once. His expression darkened. "This is fraud." Thalia's face went pale. "If he brings a public meeting, he wants you trapped. Either you return, or he makes it look like you abandoned us and caused the ruin yourself." Helena felt the room tilt. Of course. That was exactly what Ravok would do. He didn't need to win cleanly. He only needed to make her look guilty. Petra entered quietly behind Thalia, cheeks red from the cold, hands clasped tight around her shawl. She had the same look of exhausted courage Helena remembered from the garden. "I shouldn't have let it go this far," Petra said softly. Helena stepped toward her. "You didn't know." "I knew enough." Petra looked at her daughters, then at Aurelian. "And I know this now. He will not stop unless we stop him." The words hung in the air with a strange gravity. Aurelian set the papers down. "Then we stop him." Basil jumped onto the desk and sat like a judge. Finally a plan. Marta folded her arms. "He truly is impossible." "That's why you love me," Basil said. "No one said that." "You didn't deny it strongly enough." Despite everything, Helena laughed. And that laugh seemed to settle everyone, just for a second. Aurelian looked at her as if the sound had become important to him in some private, serious way. Helena noticed. Of course she noticed. She was noticing everything now, especially the way he kept looking at her as if he had found something he'd lost and was trying not to frighten it away. It made her pulse misbehave. He cleared his throat and turned back to Thalia. Can you get these records copied again? Enough for witnesses? Thalia nodded. Yes. And Mother knows the name of the village clerk who signed off on the deliveries. She says he'll talk if he's protected. Petra gave a small nod. He's afraid of Ravok. Then he'll be safer here, Aurelian said. The king said it so simply that Helena had to look up. There was no boast in him, no vanity, just certainty. And for the first time, she understood that this was part of what made him dangerous. He did not just protect with force. He protected with decision. Before she could say anything, Marta set the tea tray down and announced, "The castle staff is already gossiping, which means the whole kingdom will know by lunch." Basil raised a paw. "I'd like to file a formal complaint about the speed of this kingdom," Marta pointed at him. "You're the one spreading rumors from the windows." "Strategic information sharing," Basil said. Helena shook her head, smiling despite the tension. Then Aurelian's hand brushed her sleeve. It was a light touch, barely anything, but Helena felt it all the way through her. He was standing closer now. Close enough that she could smell the clean winter air clinging to his coat. Close enough that his voice, when he spoke, felt meant only for her. "Come with me," he said. The others understood at once. Marta took the papers from the desk. Thalia took her mother's hand. Basil hopped down and immediately followed, muttering about revolutions and badly organized paperwork. Aurelian led Helena down a side corridor and out through the lower passage into the courtyard where the winter light made everything pale and sharp. Snow had gathered in the corners of the stone path. The air was cold enough to sting. But the moment she stepped outside beside him, Helena felt strangely steady. "Where are we going?" she asked. He glanced at her. "To hear the meeting before your father gets to decide the story." Her eyes widened. "You planned this?" "I planned enough." That should have worried her. Instead, it thrilled her in a way she was not prepared to name. They reached the raised platform near the outer hall, where a small number of witnesses had already been called in. Marta, one steward, the village clerk Thalia had mentioned, and two quiet castle elders who looked like they had been dragged into this against their will. Basil was perched on the railing, acting as if he had convened the tribunal himself. When Ravok entered, he looked pleased at first. Then he saw the papers. Then he saw Thalia. Then he saw Petra standing beside Helena instead of behind him. His expression shifted so fast Helena almost felt sorry for him. Almost. He tried to recover with a laugh. "This is unnecessary." Aurelian did not move from Helena's side. "Then this will be quick." The clerk was brought forward first. He looked terrified, but Petra's calm presence seemed to help. He admitted what the others already knew. Ravok had exaggerated the debt and pressured him to sign false figures. Then Thalia presented the copied records. Then Petra spoke, voice quiet but clear, saying that she had watched for months while her husband used fear to keep the family obedient. Ravok's face went darker with every word. Helena stood very still, not because she was weak, because she was finally seeing the truth laid out in daylight. He had built his power out of secrets, and secrets, once spoken aloud, lost their teeth. Finally, Ravok turned to Helena. There it was, the last move. The attempt to bring the whole thing back onto her. "You're doing this because you're bitter," he said, "because you were never able to fit." Helena stared at him. The old shame tried to rise, but it was weaker now. It had no place to stand. She looked him in the eye and said, "No, I'm doing this because you lied." The silence that followed was enormous. Basil whispered, "Oh, she cooked him." Ravok opened his mouth, but no words came out that could help him. Aurelian turned to the gathered witnesses and said, "The bakery will not be seized. The debt will be reviewed. And any further attempt to intimidate these women will be considered a direct offense against my house." The statement was clean, sharp, final. Helena felt her breath catch. Her father had never looked smaller. Not because Aurelian threatened him, because the truth had stripped him down. When the witnesses began speaking over one another, Helena stepped back half a pace. She felt the king notice immediately and turned to her. "You okay?" he asked, low enough that no one else heard. The question was so gentle it almost undid her. Helena nodded once, but then she looked at him, really looked, and saw the strain he had been carrying all day for her sake. That strange, tender ache returned, and without thinking, she reached up and straightened the collar of his coat where the wind had turned it crooked. The motion was small. His whole body stilled. Helena realized what she had done a beat too late. Her hand hovered near his throat, her fingers brushing the edge of warmth and wool, and Aurelian's eyes held hers with an intensity that made the world seem to pause around them. "You had a crooked collar," she whispered. He gave a low, almost amused exhale. "That was your excuse?" "It was a very practical excuse." Basil made a sound of scandal from the railing. "Disgraceful. They're flirting in a legal proceeding." Marta muttered, "Let them." Aurelian looked at Helena for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice had gone quieter. "You have no idea what you do to me when you touch me like that." Heat rushed through her so quickly she had to look away. That was a mistake, because the moment she looked down, she could still feel him. The silence between them changed shape, became something heavier, more dangerous. Then, from the far edge of the courtyard, a sharp voice broke through. "I knew this would happen." All heads turned. Ravok's face had gone ugly with panic. No, not panic. Rage. And Helena understood at once that he had one final threat left. He pointed at her like a man desperate to remain the author of the story. "If I lose this," he snarled, "then she loses the bakery, the village, everything." Helena held his gaze. Then Petra stepped forward. "No," she said. "You lose your hold." Thalia stepped beside her. "So do we." And Helena, standing between them and the king, felt the shape of the next battle begin to rise. Not fear, purpose. The public truth had been spoken. Now the consequences were coming. And Ravok, for the first time, looked like a man who had finally realized the women he tried to control were no longer standing behind him. They were standing against him. 6 weeks into her new life, the storm came at dusk. It rolled over the castle in a rush of wind and black branches, rattling the windows hard enough to make the old stone seem alive. Helena stood in the long hall with Petra, Thalia, Marta, and Basil gathered close, while servants hurried past carrying lanterns and shutting doors against the rain. Everything felt tense in that thick, electric way that comes just before a break. Basil's fur stood on end. "I dislike this weather. It feels like a dramatic argument." Marta crossed her arms. "Because it is." Helena tried to smile, but her stomach had gone tight with the same uneasy instinct that had followed her all evening. Ravok had been quiet since the public meeting. Too quiet. Men like him never stayed quiet for long unless they were planning to be cruel in a new direction. Aurelian came in from the outer corridor a moment later, wet at the shoulders, expression unreadable. The moment his eyes found Helena, some of the tension in his face eased, though not enough to fool her. Something had happened. She knew it before he spoke. He guided her toward the side chamber just off the main hall, a smaller room with a fire burning low and enough privacy that no one else could overhear. Basil followed, of course. He leapt onto the back of a chair like a tiny royal witness. "If this is bad news," he said, I'd like to note that I am already emotionally prepared to be unbearable. Aurelian shut the door behind them. Then he looked at Helena. Your father tried to reach the lender directly tonight, he said. He claimed the records were forged. Helena closed her eyes for one brief second. Of course he had. He's lying, Thalia said from the doorway, having slipped in behind Marta. Petra stood just behind her, face pale but steady. Aurelian nodded once. We know. Helena opened her eyes again. Then why does it feel like he's still winning? No one answered immediately. That silence told her enough. Because the truth was not always enough when a man had spent years training the people around him to doubt themselves. Ravok had not only lied about the debt, he had gone to the lender and used Helena's name as the excuse, said she was unstable, said she had been manipulated, said the castle was poisoning her judgment. The anger that rose in her was so sharp it almost made her dizzy. He's trying to make me the problem, she said. Yes, Aurelian replied. Helena looked up at him. And you let him get that far? The question should have sounded unfair. It did not. It sounded hurt, tired, human. Aurelian's jaw flexed once. No, but he moved faster than expected. Basil let out a very small, offended sound. Excuse me, I find that hard to believe. He doesn't seem like a man with much speed in him. Marta nodded gravely. More like a man with an emotional limp. Helena laughed once, despite the knot in her chest, and the sound made Aurelian look at her with that same quiet focus he always had, as if her reactions mattered more than anyone else's opinions in the room. Petra stepped forward then, holding a folded piece of cloth in both hands. I have something, she said. Helena looked at her mother, surprised. Petra opened the cloth and revealed a small iron key and a sealed copy of the bakery's old trade book. I kept the real records hidden under the flour bins for years. I was afraid to say it aloud, but I can't keep being afraid. Thalia nodded, face fierce. And I memorized the names of the men who came to collect payment. Father never expected us to pay attention. Basil blinked at them. Oh, I love this part. The quiet women have been plotting. The room went still. Helena stared at the key, then at her mother, then at Thalia. It was not just proof. It was power. Quiet, hidden power, held all this time by the women he had assumed were too soft to resist him. Something in Helena's chest shifted again, and this time it was not pain. It was pride. Aurelian took the book and skimmed it once, then twice. His expression hardened with each line. This is enough, he said. Helena looked at him. Enough for what? His gaze lifted. To ruin his version of the story. That made Marta smile with open satisfaction. Finally. The storm slapped rain hard against the windows. Somewhere outside, a gate slammed, and Helena turned sharply. Basil's ears perked. That sounds like a villain entrance. Before anyone could answer, a servant burst into the room, breathless. My king, he said. Ravok is at the lower courtyard. He is demanding to speak in front of the witnesses. Helena's body went cold. Aurelian's hand touched the small of her back once, brief and steady. Then we give him his audience. The lower courtyard was lit with torches and wind-whipped rain. By the time Helena reached it, her hair was damp at the temples, her cloak clinging to her shoulders. Ravok stood at the center of the stone ground, like a man who believed anger made him larger. Water ran down the edges of his coat. His face was red with cold and rage, and beside him stood the lender's clerk. Helena knew at once that this was not a coincidence. Ravok had brought him here to pressure, to perform, to trap. He lifted his voice before anyone else could speak. This family has been slandered. My daughter has been fed lies, and this king has meddled where he does not belong, Basil hissed. He really thinks volume is a substitute for truth. Aurelian stepped forward, calm as a drawn blade. And yet here we are. Ravok's eyes flicked to the gathered witnesses. Petra, Thalia, Marta, the steward, Helena. Then he sneered, recovering his mask. "You've all been manipulated by a woman who always wanted attention," he said, pointing at Helena. "She's dramatic. She has always been dramatic." Helena felt the words hit, old and familiar, meant to drag her back into the shape he preferred. But this time her mother moved first. "She was never dramatic," Petra said, voice firm enough to carry. "She was hurt." Thalia stepped beside her, and tired of being blamed for everything. Marta folded her arms. "And frankly, your performance is exhausting." The clerk looked as though he wished he were anywhere else on earth. Ravok turned redder. Then he made his mistake. He looked at Helena and said, "If you had been easier to manage, none of this would have happened." The courtyard went silent. Helena heard rain, wind, her own heartbeat. Then Aurelian spoke. "No," he said, and the word cut through everything. "This happened because you mistook cruelty for authority." Ravok's face twitched. Aurelian took one step closer. "You falsified debt records. You manipulated a lender. You used your wife and daughters as bargaining pieces. That ends tonight." The clerk flinched. "I can confirm the records were altered," he blurted, panic overtaking loyalty. "I did not want to be involved, but he insisted." Ravok spun toward him in fury, but it was too late. Thalia had already stepped forward with the copied pages. Petra lifted the original book. Helena, heart hammering, held out the key. 3 women, 3 pieces, 1 truth. The storm seemed to deepen around them. Ravok stared as the evidence layered itself in front of him, and for the first time Helena saw something raw and ugly break through his rage. Fear, not of punishment, of being seen. Basil's voice was very soft now. "There it is, the man behind the curtain." Aurelian turned to Helena, not to command, not to rescue, but to ask, without words. She lifted her chin. "Yes," she said. That was all it took. Aurelian addressed the gathered witnesses. "The bakery debt is void until reviewed. Ravok's claims against Helena are false. Any attempt to threaten her family again will be treated as an offense against my house." The words settled like iron. Ravok's mouth opened, but nothing useful came out. Helena looked at him then, really looked, and saw how small he had become once the lies were stripped away. He was still angry, still dangerous in the petty ways he knew best, but he was no longer untouchable. Thalia stepped forward one more time, her voice steady as rain. "You told us we were nothing without you," she said. "But you were wrong." Petra's hand found Helena's. Helena squeezed back, and in that single touch, the whole shape of their future shifted. No speeches, no spectacle. Just the 3 of them standing together after years of being kept apart. Ravok stared at them, and Helena could tell he knew it too. He had not only lost control, he had created the very alliance that would outlast him. Aurelian's hand brushed Helena's elbow. A quiet question. She turned toward him. There was rain in his hair, stormlight in his eyes, and a warmth in his expression that made her chest ache in the best possible way. She had seen him serious, cold, protective, but this looked different. It looked like relief, like joy, barely kept in check, like something he had been missing before she arrived. And Helena understood then with startling clarity. She had not simply entered his life. She had reached something inside him that had been sleeping too long. The thought made her breath catch. Basil, who apparently had no respect for emotional revelations, said, "Well, this is sickeningly lovely." Marta dabbed at one eye with her thumb and frowned as if offended by her own reaction. "I hate that he's right." Helena almost laughed, but then Aurelian leaned closer and said quietly, for her alone, "You did this." She shook her head. He smiled, faint but real. "No, you let yourself be seen." That one line landed deeper than any praise she had ever heard. The rain kept falling, the torches hissed. Ravok looked trapped in the middle of a story he could no longer control, and Helena, standing beside the king while her mother and sister held the truth in their hands, realized that the worst part of her life was ending not with collapse, but with witnesses. The castle had never sounded like this before. Not with shouting, not with ceremony, not with duty pressing on every stone. It sounded alive. Helena stood in the great hall at dawn, the first pale light sliding through the tall windows and turning the dust in the air into gold. Around her, servants moved quickly but smiling now, not fearful. Marta was barking orders with the authority of a general. Basil sat on the back of a chair like he owned the estate. Thalia and Petra stood near the long table with fresh bread, both of them looking strangely lighter, as if years had been quietly lifted from their shoulders overnight. And Aurelian stood at the end of the hall, watching Helena with that same steady, intense gaze that had first found her in the corridor with a basket of bread and a wounded heart. The public hearing had ended Ravok's hold over them. The debt was exposed. The lies were torn open. The lender had withdrawn support. The village clerk had signed a full statement. Ravok had left the castle the night before with no crowd, no triumph, and no voice left worth listening to. Not banished in a blaze, not destroyed by spectacle, but emptied out by truth. That, Helena had learned, was sometimes a better ending. Not because it was tidy, because it was earned. Basil yawned. If this becomes sentimental, I'm leaving. You say that every 5 minutes, Marta muttered. It keeps the mood disciplined. Helena almost laughed, but her eyes stayed on Aurelian. He moved toward her, slow enough to give her the choice to step away. She didn't. By now, she knew him well enough to understand that his patience was not weakness. It was respect. You didn't sleep, he said. Helena tilted her head. Neither did you. That is because I was busy making sure your father could not do anything foolish. Was he planning to? Aurelian's mouth twitched. Probably. The answer made her smile, and this time he looked at her like the smile itself had become a kind of home. Behind them, the hall buzzed with preparation, not for war, not for politics, not for spectacle, for a feast, for a decision, for a life that belonged to them now in a way it had never belonged to anyone else before. Petra came forward first, carrying a small cloth bundle. Thalia followed with a ribbon tied around her wrist. Petra's voice trembled slightly. We wanted to do this properly. Helena looked between them, puzzled. Thalia grinned. That's a lie. I wanted to do it dramatically, but Mother insisted on dignity. That was wise, Petra said, though her mouth betrayed a smile. She opened the bundle. Inside was a simple circlet woven from wintergreen, dried lavender, and small white blossoms from the garden that survived the cold under the castle walls. Nothing jeweled, nothing grand. It was more beautiful than jewels. Helena stared. I made it, Petra said softly. For your first true morning here. Helena's throat tightened so suddenly she had to look away. Thalia stepped closer and tucked a stray piece of hair behind Helena's ear. You've spent your whole life being told you took up too much space, she said. Turns out you were just filling the wrong room. That did it. Helena laughed and nearly cried at once. Basil covered his eyes with one paw. Awful. All of this is awful. I'm being emotionally attacked. Marta wiped one cheek and snapped, No one invited your dramatic suffering. Aurelian took the circlet from Petra with careful hands, as though he understood its weight immediately. Then he looked at Helena. May I? The question shattered something in her. Not because it was formal, because it wasn't. She nodded. He placed the circlet gently over her hair, and when his fingers brushed her temple, the touch felt like a vow. It was light, reverent, almost unbearably tender. The hall fell quiet. Helena looked up at him and saw the answer in his face before he spoke it. Not possession, not destiny as a cage, choice. "I lost my queen," he said, voice low enough that only she could fully hear. "And I thought that meant joy had gone with her." Helena held still. "But it didn't," he said. It waited. A breath slipped out of Helena before she could stop it. Then he reached for her hands, and the whole hall seemed to lean closer. "When you came into my life," he said, "you brought laughter back into rooms that had forgotten it. You looked at me like I was still a man and not only a crown. You challenged me. You steadied me. You made this castle feel like a place where someone might actually live instead of endure." Helena's fingers tightened around his eyes never left hers. "And I know now," he said, "that I do not want to wait for fate to decide whether we belong to each other. I want to choose you." The words struck like thunder. A hush rolled through the hall. Even Basil had gone silent. Aurelian drew a small breath and continued. "Not because you were rejected, not because your suffering led you here, but because you are Helena. Brave, sharp, kind, infuriating, unforgettable. Because when I look at you, I do not feel like a king trying to preserve a house. I feel like a man being given back his life." The room was so still Helena could hear the fire crackling. Then Petra made a tiny broken sound of happiness and covered her mouth. Thalia was smiling through tears. Marta muttered, "About time." Basil whispered, "This is disgustingly excellent." Helena stared at Aurelian. The world narrowed to the space between their hands. He had not declared ownership. He had declared love. And she understood, with a sudden clarity that hurt in the best way, that she had been loving him too, in all the small places where she had been afraid to name it. In the way her heart steadied when he entered a room, in the way his quiet attention made her feel seen instead of examined, in the way his grief had looked like hers in different clothes. She drew in a breath. "When you found me," she said, voice shaking only once, "I thought I was still the woman my father made me feel like. Too much, too soft, too visible." Aurelian's face tightened with feeling. "But you never looked at me that way," Helena continued. "You looked at me like I was something worth waiting for." Her eyes burned. "I don't want to be a rescue," she said. "I don't want to be a consolation. I want to be chosen." Aurelian's answer came instantly. "You are." That was it. No ceremony could have been grander. No court could have made it more powerful. The hall, the fire, the bread, the winter flowers, the women who had fought quietly beside her, the man who had stood beside her without ever trying to own her. Everything narrowed to that single word. Chosen. Helena stepped closer. Then, with the whole hall watching, she rose onto her toes and kissed him. It was not cautious. It was not uncertain. It was the kiss of a woman who had finally stopped asking permission from the life that had hurt her. The kiss of a king who had waited too long to be touched with truth. The room around them seemed to break open with sound. Marta laughing, Thalia gasping, Basil making some outrageously offended comment about public indecency, and yet Helena heard almost none of it, because Aurelian kissed her back as if he had been starved for the feeling. His hand came to her waist, steady and warm. His other touched her cheek with such care it almost made her knees weak. No hunger without tenderness, no passion without respect. Just two people who had lost too much and were finally finding something worth keeping. When they parted, Helena was smiling and breathless and a little stunned by the sheer force of it. Basil sighed from somewhere nearby. At last, a conclusion with proper romance and poor judgment. Marta laughed outright. Thalia rolled her eyes. Petra looked as if she might cry again. Aurelian pressed his forehead briefly to Helena's, a private gesture in a public room. "Stay with me," he murmured. Helena smiled. "I already am." And she was. Not as a burden, not as a secret, not as a mistake, as his equal. As the woman who had stepped into the silence of his life and filled it with laughter, warmth, and the stubborn, fearless kind of love that could only belong to someone who had survived being told she was too much. The feast came after, but it felt secondary to what had already happened. Bread was broken, tea was poured. The servants relaxed enough to smile openly. One of the castle dogs, a stout old fellow named Angus, tried to steal a roast roll from Basil and was promptly scolded by a sparrow named Maisie, who informed him that he had the table manners of a hedge. Basil nearly choked laughing. Helena leaned against Aurelian's side and watched it all unfold. The warmth of the hall, and the easy noise of people no longer afraid. Petra laughed with Thalia for the first time in what felt like years. Marta said exactly what she thought to anyone who crossed her path. The village clerk, no longer trembling, accepted a bowl of stew like a man who had survived something and lived to regret it only a little. And Ravok was gone. Not forgotten. Never that. But no longer the center of anything. That was the true victory. Helena looked around the hall, at the women who had stood together, at the king who had chosen love instead of loneliness, and felt something settle in her chest so peacefully it almost hurt. Home. Not the house that had expelled her. This one. This life. This love. Epilogue. Months later, the castle garden was green again. Winter had passed. Spring had returned in soft light and open windows. Helena stood beneath the flowering arch near the herb shed, one hand resting on the gentle curve of her belly, while Aurelian smiled at her with a look so openly adoring it would have embarrassed him once. It did not embarrass him now. Basil, older only in attitude, was sprawled in a sunbeam nearby, complaining that the new blanket on the bench was too luxurious for cats of principle. Marta called from the kitchen that lunch was ready. Thalia laughed from the path, carrying a basket of herbs with her mother beside her. The bakery flourished. The castle flourished. The women flourished. And Helena, who had once believed she was too much for the world, now knew the truth. She had simply been waiting for the right place to belong. She looked up at Aurelian, and he kissed her forehead with quiet certainty, like a man who had finally come home too. And this time, no one was waiting for her to be smaller. The end.